Welcome back here today on the beautiful campus of Florida Panhandle Technical College, here in another of our series of what's going on in the community. With us today is Landrea Garrett from Kindred at Home. When we come back, we're going to talk to Landrea about what is Kindred, obviously. More importantly, if you've got somebody in your family that requires visitation by nurses, by healthcare professionals, you're certainly going to know what we're talking about. If you're on the verge of needing that, either yourself or maybe for a loved one, this is probably one you're not going to want to miss. That missing link between hospital stay and not seeing medical care at all is exactly what Kindred provides, sometimes post-surgery, sometimes in lieu of a hospital stay. We'll let Landrea talk about all this and more when we do come back, but this is one that hits hard as the graying of America continues for all the baby boomers out there. We, and I count myself as one of us, we are getting closer and closer to needing that extended or long-term care. When we come back, we're going to talk to Kindred at Home about exactly that. We'll be right back. Welcome back. As mentioned, our guest is Landrea Garrett from Kindred at Home. Thanks so much for taking the time today. We've been talking for a while. I know that you have assumed other duties, so you're out and around. You're very busy. Thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Over the years, we've had the opportunity to visit with your personnel at one time under the umbrella of Gentiva, since having some corporate changes, but at the end of the day, same people providing the same service. Let's start with the nuts and bolts, Landrea. Talk about what is Kindred at Home, with whom do you work, who are your clients, and exactly what kind of services do you provide?
Well, we are Kindred at Home. We're the largest nationally based home health company, like you said, formerly known as Gentiva, and our local office is in Marianna, Florida. And so our population is generally the geriatric public. Our skilled nursing involves medication management, disease management, assessment of the patient's condition in the home, fall risk assessments. We do wound care, anything that's doctor ordered, we can provide that service in the home.
Would it be fair to say that your services would most come post-hospital stay or post-surgical? Basically?
There is definitely a need. It's called the transitional period between coming home from the hospital to being at home. As you know, most patients are no better, maybe even worse when they're discharged from the hospital because, you know, they can't keep you but for such, you know, amount of time. So they're not quite where they can stay in the hospital, but yet they still need some sort of service at home to try to hopefully get back to their baseline and to maintain that independence.
It's interesting that you say that patient that maybe some of your RNs or some of your therapists are dealing with at home post-hospital stay are sometimes in worse condition. Certainly that's no reflection on the hospital, but in reality, if they just underwent surgery, now they have sutures, now they are weakened from maybe that several-day stay in a hospital bed, their surgical procedure, they are truly worse off. You may have repaired what was wrong, but now they have that recuperation period or that therapy session. You have, I presume, RNs, also therapists of all nature. Talk about that broad stroke of services that you would provide to that person depending on what their needs are.
Well, we would come into the home, assess the patient, assess their home environment, also assess the patient's understanding of their own condition, and then determine, the nurse individualizes the care based on what that patient needs. And then our therapist will then, you know, deliver that type of therapy based on what is going on with the patient. What, you know, if they've had a orthopedic surgery, then there's certain protocols that they'll follow. And, you know, our visits are lined up with the doctor's orders as far as the frequency. So it just kind of, it depends on the nature of the condition that the patient's going through.
So depending on the conditions, you may have to have an RN who can administer medications or who can maybe work with IVs and so forth, or you just may simply need a speech pathologist or a orthopedic therapist.
If the patient's had a stroke or CVA, then, you know, speech therapy may be key in their recovery. If sometimes the patient needs more medication management or reconciliation, where they just need to be educated on how and when to take their medications, or maybe why they're taking their medications. A lot of seniors will go to the doctor and they may have a specialist on board, or 2 or 3 specialists, and they'll have we've found several times where they'll have one medication but maybe 5 different doses, different bottles, and they're not sure what to take. So the nurse will actually reconcile their medications for them, educate them, and get them set on a schedule, so that way they're taking them safely and effectively.
And I'm glad that you talk about the medicine end of things, because that is a huge part. We've had Michael Kozar, who is the CEO of Northwest Florida Community Hospital. We've had other healthcare providers in the community talking about just this. Not too long ago, one of the local pharmacies made a partnership with Northwest Florida Community Hospital, whereby if somebody was in a hospital bed and they were getting ready to get discharged and they got their prescription, that this prescription would actually be filled and delivered to the bedside instead of handing that person a prescription as they walked out the hospital door. They found that many people, maybe even a preponderance, weren't filling that prescription.
Oh, definitely.
So what you're talking about is making sure that the person has filled their prescription, that they're taking it, and more importantly, probably than anything else, that there's not counterindicative drugs that they're also taking. You find yourself at the apex of all these other medical providers, and obviously sometimes, and most times, probably it's the patient's fault, but in many cases, healthcare providers don't know that another doctor is prescribing.
Right.
And so again, that counterindicative nature of drugs, your nurses, your therapists, and all of your personnel can look at these and say, wait a minute, you really probably shouldn't be taking that many milligrams, or these 2 things are the same, are you taking both of them, or these 2 things shouldn't be taken at the same time. How often do you hear those stories where you're actually, providing such good counsel that you're possibly even saving lives?
Oh, yeah. Well, that is a very common scenario. In fact, our nurses and our therapists are trained to monitor vital signs. So when they come in, maybe the person's blood pressure is low, but they're still going to take their prescribed high blood pressure medicine that day. And maybe they don't need to take that just yet until we've reached the doctor and communicated to them. So it's just getting there and providing that education about their disease and the medications that they're on, and maybe preventing like their blood pressure bottoming out, or maybe having to go to the ER that day. So yeah, with that, it happens a lot.
Would it be fair to presume that a lot of your services are insurance-based? In other words, they are being paid for by follow-up insurance, health insurance, extended care insurance, that sort of thing?
Yes.
So you're probably, and I'm not playing devil's advocate against healthcare or insurance at this point. As a matter of fact, I'm just the opposite. It would seem that your services could potentially be saving insurance companies and healthcare providers not just money, but sometimes the probability of being sued because you're catching things.
Right. And Medicare is now tracking like the return to hospital rates, and they're going to start dinging the acute care organizations. So, if you have that service at home and maybe prevent some of these rehospitalizations, it'll be a big service to those type of organizations. We
found out about that return to hospital ratio or numbers from Michael Kozar, once again CEO at NFCH. And he pointed out that it's to the hospital's benefit to make sure that they provide the very best service for as long as it's necessary within confines of insurance coverage.
Right.
So that, because it's worse to get somebody back in for the same malady,
Exactly.
And like you say, you're being dinged by somebody in the state, or at some point maybe your own insurance company. People forget that hospitals have insurance companies as well who insure them against malpractice and all the rest of it. What kind of geographical area do you actually cover personally on behalf of Kindred?
Well, I cover Holmes County, Jackson, Washington, Liberty, Calhoun, and we've just extended into some of Gadsden County as well.
Wow. So
yeah, it's a very large, we're growing exponentially. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, no, so you're burning a lot of gas.
Yes, sir.
And your job, basically personally, Landrea, you are the outreach person. You're making, I would imagine, physicians and hospitals and the public aware of the services you provide. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir. I focus more on the community groups, like our senior centers. I go a lot to church groups, do a lot of outreach there, just anywhere where there's maybe a public need to hear this information, where they could benefit from our services.
So does the patient, upon discharge from the hospital, make that conscious decision of which healthcare provider?
Yes, it is patient. It's a patient's decision.
And how do they even find out that pool from which they can choose?
The social worker or the case manager, their job is to present the options to the patient upon discharge, or actually when they're admitted, the discharge planning starts immediately.
Now, I find that somewhat fascinating because many people say, got to go to the hospital, either go by ambulance or a personal vehicle, you have the procedure done, you go home. What they fail to talk about is all those people, all the moving parts that make up for the best outcomes possible for those patients. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about that process. Guy goes to a surgeon, he gets his gallbladder removed, he might be at an advanced age, they may have had to stabilize him in other respects before they could even do surgery. He comes out post-op, he's good enough to go home, but now, as you pointed out, he's in actually worse condition than he was as far as needing outside help.
Right.
So now you've got social workers and that what would you call it, the discharge staff. Now they're talking to you, they're talking to the patient, they're talking to their healthcare providers, their doctors and individual, mm-hmm. They're even talking to the pharmacy to find out what kind of scripts they're bringing home. At that point, that patient is making that conscious decision to call Kindred?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Or you're recommended perhaps by one of those discharge people at that point, or they say, here's your options?
Right. Usually they just maybe present the information to them, material that we've provided them with, and then the patient chooses.
There are a lot of people coming out of, and we're talking about post-op, so coming out of a hospital who choose, for whatever reason, either they think their insurance doesn't cover it or their insurance doesn't cover it, or they don't have insurance at all, who are not getting that follow-up care, which is actually worsening mm-hmm. and possibly being life-threatening at the end of the day? Right,
and a lot of people are not aware that if they have Medicare, it is covered at 100%. Our care, there's not an out-of-pocket cost, and then we do accept most private insurances as well. So, I mean, it's to their benefit to have the follow-up services in order to get back to their baseline as quickly as possible and resume their normal life at home.
You have a large staff, and you mentioned the counties that your office covers. How many roughly, and this is just ballpark, how many RNs and therapists and so forth, how much staff do you have for that area that you cover roughly? Do you have a rough idea of how many? A bunch.
It's too many for me to know.
I know that one of your branches under the old Gentiva was Emerald Coast Hospice, and they make use of volunteers. Now, does Kindred at Home have a volunteer base as well that is part of the organization?
No, we don't have a volunteer basis. Our staff is trained, and they're therapists and they're nurses, so they're compensated.
Typically licensed professionals.
Yes.
We actually brought you here at the end of all this conversation, kind of to lay the groundwork for heart health awareness. I know that we're coming up on the month that we celebrate or recognize or try to put a spotlight on just that. Talk a little bit about your efforts in that direction at this time of year.
Well, February is American Heart Month, and Kindred has developed a specialty program. It's called Cardiopulmonary Program. And so this program focuses on heart and lung disease related conditions such as congestive heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder or disease, like COPD. If you've had heart attacks, bypass surgery, pneumonia, this program is centered around diseases like that.
COPD and some of those chronic diseases are exacerbated by the flu season, obviously, and we're in the midst of it. Hopefully we're on the tail end of it. And just let's talk about that just for a second. Do we seem to be on the downslide now from the apex of what was such an epidemic for a while?
I think we are definitely in the peak of it, and maybe after this month we may see where we're residing some. But yeah, we're still in the midst of it right now.
I know our staff, and we have to attend a lot of events. Mardi Gras this weekend, for instance, a lot of fist bumps instead of shaking hands, not as many hugging people. And I'm a hugger, and it's like, you try to, are you safe? Are you clean? Have you had the flu yet? So I would imagine that, and getting away from the heart health issue just for a moment, that you probably find yourself focused on those pandemics such as the flu that we're experiencing now,
right.
Because it definitely creates more workload.
Right, and part of my job, like I said, I focus on the senior centers. So flu prevention education was a huge part of my job for the last several months. In fact, just giving out hand sanitizer and just we've given away a lot of that. I think, nursing professionals just take baths in it daily, but, other than that, they still have to be around it. They're exposed to it, and there's nothing they can really do to prevent that. So just educating the public is a benefit to us as well, because we're having to protect ourselves.
One line item on our budget this month and last, actually, for our business has been hand sanitizer. And I think my wife sprinkles it like holy water. And, it's like you wash your hands, you dry yourself on a towel, and then you think maybe that towel was dirty, so you do more hand sanitizer. And it gets to the point where you never quit. Go to a restaurant, and, all of a sudden, she's the cleaner, and she's cleaning everything down from the light fixture down to our chairs. But you have to be cognizant of that. Is that part of your educational process as well, talking to people during times of flu, for instance, about that generalized health care?
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Back to the heart health issue, it's arguable that heart disease is one of the number one killers. I think that there are all kinds of statistics out there. Many times heart disease might have been caused by that bad traffic wreck you were in. So the guy that takes the statistics for the traffic wreck saying it's the car wreck, but in reality it was heart. At the end of the day, it's a very bad situation that we have. Do we find, and I think that we've been cognizant of heart health long enough now, 20, 30, 40 years maybe that we've been talking about, probably in the last 25 years more than anything. Are we seeing that people overall are more healthy, or are we generating more fast food places and all-you-can-eat restaurants, and we're actually doing just the opposite, supersizing everything so that we've got more obesity? Do you think we're on the uprise as far as good health, or are we making any dent in it at all?
I think we're making dents in it. I know with our program specifically, they've done the research and studied the patients that have been through it, over 30,000 patients, and we've shown with our program that we have drastically reduced the return to hospitalization with those patients that have gone through the program versus patients that have not received this special type of care.
From a heart health point of view, and we have this show with other people on several times a year, but there's never too much of this as far as we're concerned.
Exactly.
What are the prime indicators or the prime risk factors for heart problems that people should be aware of?
Yeah, a lot of risk factors. Your diet is a major risk factor. If you take a lot of salt in, if you're not very active, not very mobile, you eat foods that are high in fats, like I said, high in salt. Processed foods are a good example of that. Those are some of the major things that can lead to heart disease.
And yet we make it so very easy for people to eat just that. Mom, 3 kids, they got basketball practice, they got softball practice, they got t-ball practice, and all the kids are going different directions. Dad's working late, mom pulls through the fast food lane. It might be convenient. It's no longer fast or inexpensive or healthy. Mm-hmm. There are healthy alternatives, but what kid doesn't want chicken fingers and fries? I mean,
right.
We got 6 grandkids. I know, it's what they eat, pancakes and chicken fingers, and they're good.
Yeah.
So, are we making the kinds of strides? Are we making progress in education? Do you see in your everyday educational efforts, are people getting the message overall?
Well, I think the fast food industry has definitely got the message, and they know they have to offer the healthy alternatives at least. I know with my kids, like you said, it's nuggets and fries, but they like the apples. There's that choice now, and then the yogurts are provided in those meals too. So I think you can only do so much for that person. It has to be their choice.
We can't save people from themselves.
Exactly.
It's gotten pretty ridiculous in the insurance industry, for instance. Chainsaws now come with a sticker that say, do not operate underwater. And, the hair dryers say, do not operate while in the shower. And, but we do, and people get sued if we don't protect people from their own stupidity. I think it's the Darwin Theory, in effect. We're just kind of winnowing out the people that probably shouldn't be here, the ones who say, hey, hold my beer and watch this, And we see that stuff all the time on YouTube, the fail army, the stuff that people are doing that is foolish. And at the end of the day, we're looking at those things where, the redneck jumps off his roof onto a moving snowmobile, but in reality, it's something much more simple and much more closer to home, and that's that simple act of buying dinner for your kids when you're in a rush. So, as you point out, fast food industry has gotten that message because of the response, because of the demand from their consumers, but again, you can't save people from themselves. So people are either going to listen or they're not. It's interesting, especially at my age. I've got a lot of friends who are passing. And, you know, the thing that everybody likes to say is if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have, you know, been a little better to myself, or I would have taken it easier, you know, so that I wouldn't be all stove up at this age. But so often now, at an advanced age, you're paying for your sins. So whether you're a heavy drinker or a smoker, you ate too much, or you did stupid things, you were a downhill racer and get caught up in the avalanches, or you were a sports player and got too many hits in the head, or you were a boxer or a mixed martial artist, all of these things. In other words, there's a whole lot of ways to go. And at the end of the day, you sort of pick your own path, and people like you in the profession that you're in can only do so much to educate that audience.
Right.
Explain a little bit about what you actually do in those educational processes. You mentioned senior citizens going into assisted living facilities, nursing homes, and so forth. Talk a little bit about what you would actually do when you come in that door. What are you going to be talking about?
Well, it just kind of depends on the theme of the month. Like, I've done the flu prevention. Right before the holidays, it was stress relieving techniques, time management techniques for the seniors. This month, it's going to be focusing on heart health and, our programs and what we have to offer.
Thanks for taking the time today. Before we leave, talk a little bit about how somebody can get in touch with either you personally, if that's the case. Maybe they are interested in having a class at their nursing home or at their school or some other facility, or if they just want to find out more about Kindred at Home, how would they do that?
Well, they can contact our local office in Marietta, and the number's 850-526-1932.
Okay. Do you have a website?
Yes, it's www.kindredathome.com.
Okay. I'd like for you to consider the invitation to maybe come back quarterly or even every month if it's necessary. I know that you've got a theme of the quarter anyway, possibly every month. I think it would be of a value for you to come on and let our viewers. Sometimes we have to state the obvious over and over and over again. We all know what we shouldn't do. We all know what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating, but yet we still do. Sometimes it takes a little poke to kind of refresh our memory and to straighten us out a little bit. Would you be willing to do that over time?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest today has been Landrea Garrett from Kindred at Home. We've kind of all over the place talking in broad strokes about National Heart Health Month, but Kindred at Home, one of those services that you're not going to even think about unless you need them. Check into them now before you do. It's certainly a good education process. They cover a very large area, provide a very large array of services. If you've got health issues, if you're getting ready for surgery or coming out of a hospital for whatever reason, possibly these services are going to be exactly what you need. We'll be right back.